My name is Arthur Bain. I'm 68 years old now, and for 33 years I've been living a lie, or maybe the only truth that ever mattered, out in the Atchafalaya swamp, deeper than any sane person would go. I have a friend. He's not human. He's 9 feet tall, covered in dark matted hair that smells like wet earth and cypress, and he's the only reason I'm still alive. He's what the locals whisper about. The skunk ape. A Bigfoot. I just call him Moses. I've been visiting him, protecting him, keeping his secret since 1991. I've guarded him from hunters, from oil surveyors, from the whole damn world. I thought I was successful, but last week, I found out I wasn't. Last week, the FBI found us. This isn't the story you think it is. This isn't about them locking me up or putting him in a cage. This is about what they did next. This is the story of how an isolated man became the only human contact for an impossible creature, and what happened when the most powerful organization on Earth discovered our secret. It all started with the flood. Back in 1991, the spring had been wet, and the Atchafalaya was swallowing the world. The water was high, cold, and moving fast. I was 35 years old back then, running from a divorce that had taken just about everything from me. I'd bought a sinking 20-acre plot out in the basin a year earlier. It was perfect for someone like me who just wanted to be left alone. My nearest neighbor was a 40-minute boat ride away. I was just a guy trying to fish, trap, and forget the life I'd left behind. I was content with the silence, the isolation, and the hum of the mosquitoes. On May 4th, 1991, I was out in my flat-bottom boat, checking my traps. The water was higher than I'd ever seen it, pushing into territories that were usually dry land. That's when I heard it. It was a sound that didn't belong, a low, guttural moan that was vibrating right through the hull of my boat. It wasn't a gator, and it wasn't a bear. It was something in pain. I grabbed my shotgun. You don't go exploring strange sounds in the swamp unarmed. I killed the engine and pulled the boat toward the sound, pushing through a thicket of cypress trees into a small, flooded clearing I'd never seen before. And that's when I found him. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. The fog was thick, and the light was playing tricks. I thought it was a bear, maybe, or a huge cypress stump. But as I pulled the boat closer, the shape moved. It was clinging to a half-submerged cypress tree, its body mostly out of the water, and it was massive. At least 8, maybe 9 feet tall, covered in thick dark hair that was matted with algae and mud. Its arms were impossibly long. And the face, God, the face was nothing I'd ever seen. It wasn't an ape, and it wasn't a man. It was something in between. It had a heavy brow, a broad flat nose, and eyes that were watching me with a terrifying mix of pain and raw intelligence. A Bigfoot, a real living Bigfoot, right here in the Atchafalaya. We call them the skunk ape. The Cajun cousin, but you never ever think you'll see one. My first instinct was to rack a shell into the shotgun. Every story I'd ever heard, every campfire tale about these things, came rushing back. They were monsters. They killed deer, hogs, even people who wandered too far. My hand was shaking on the pump action, but then it looked at me, and I saw something that just stopped me cold. It wasn't threatening me. It wasn't growling or posturing. It was just holding on. It looked exhausted, and I saw the same thing I'd seen in the mirror for the last year. Fear. It was terrified of me. I lowered the barrel of the shotgun, just a few inches. "Easy now," I said, my voice hoarse. I don't know why I talked to it. It just felt wrong to keep a weapon pointed at it. I'm not gonna hurt you." I let the boat drift closer, keeping my movements slow. That's when I saw the real problem. Its left leg was trapped. The flood must have washed out an old abandoned trapping line. A heavy rusted steel trap, the kind they used for gators, illegal now for years, was clamped shut just below its knee. The chain was wrapped around a submerged log, pinning it to the spot. The leg was mangled. The trap's teeth were buried deep in the muscle and sinew. The water around it was dark with blood. It made that low, moaning sound again, softer this time. It wasn't a threat. It was a plea. It was asking for help. I've helped trapped animals before. Raccoons, otters, even a gator or two. But this was different. This was something that wasn't supposed to exist. This was something that, if anyone found out, would bring the whole world crashing down on this swamp. Scientists, government agents, trigger-happy hunters from every state in the Union. I should have turned the boat around. I should have pulled away and pretended I never saw it. That's what a smart man would have done. But looking at it, this huge, impossible creature suffering, looking at me with those knowing eyes, I just couldn't do it. I couldn't just leave it to die. All right, I said, more to myself than to it. All right, let's see what we can do. I ran the boat back to my cabin. It was the fastest trip I'd ever made. I grabbed my heavy-duty toolbox, the one with the bolt cutters and the pry bar. I grabbed my first aid kit, a bottle of iodine, and a full bottle of whiskey. It was the only anesthetic I had. When I got back, maybe 30 minutes later, it was still there. It hadn't moved, but its eyes were on me the second my boat broke through the trees. This is gonna hurt like hell, I told it, holding up the bolt cutters. But if I don't get that thing off, the infection will kill you before the water drops. I eased the boat right up next to it. It tensed. A low rumble started in its chest, and the smell, God, the smell hit me. That musky, wet animal smell the skunk ape is famous for. It was overwhelming. I'm here to help, I said, keeping my voice low. You gotta let me help. I've never been so scared in my life. I was close enough to touch it. One swing of those arms would have broken my neck, but it didn't attack. It just watched me. It seemed to understand. It took me almost an hour. I had to get into the water, standing chest deep in the cold mud, working on the chain first. The creature tensed, it roared in pain, a sound that shook the trees, but it never once tried to strike me. Finally, I got the bolt cutters on the main spring of the trap. I put all my weight into it, and with a loud snap, the jaws popped open. The creature let out a gasp. It almost collapsed right there. The leg was a mess. A horrible, deep wound. I got back in the boat, opened the iodine, and just poured half the bottle over the wound. It let out a scream that I'm sure they heard all the way in Baton Rouge, but it held still. You can't stay here, I said, exhausted, my hands shaking. You need to get somewhere safe, somewhere dry. It tried to move, tried to pull itself up the tree, but its leg gave out. It couldn't put any weight on it. I looked around. If I left it here, it would die. Infection, or a gator, or a hunter would find it. And right then, I made the decision. The one that would change everything for the next 33 years. My place, I said, pointing back the way I came. It's not much, but it's dry. And it's hidden. I didn't know how I'd get it there. I didn't know what I'd do with it. I just knew I couldn't leave it. I pulled the boat back home, cleared out the old sturdy smokehouse behind my cabin, and grabbed every rope I owned. I was about to do the stupidest, most dangerous thing in my life. I was going to bring a Bigfoot home. Getting him back to my cabin was the hardest physical work I've ever done. It took hours. It's only about a quarter mile through the swamp, but it felt like 100. He couldn't walk, not really. He could only hop and drag that mangled leg. I used my boat to support most of his weight. I'd get him leaning on the gunwale and I'd pull the boat forward, foot by agonizing foot, while he sort of limped and crawled alongside through the shallow water and mud. The whole time my heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. Every snap of a twig, every bird call sounded like an approaching hunter. I was paranoid, terrified. What in God's name was I doing? I wasn't just helping an animal. I was hiding evidence. I was harboring the biggest secret on the planet. By the time we reached the muddy bank behind my cabin, it was late afternoon, and we were both exhausted. He collapsed onto the mud, breathing in huge, ragged gasps. I was covered in his blood and my own sweat. My smokehouse was just an old windowless cypress wood shed, built strong to keep bears out. It was perfect. It was dark, secure, and far enough from the cabin that I wouldn't hear him, and he wouldn't hear me. Okay, big guy, I panted. Just a little further. We gotta get you inside before dark. I half-dragged, half-coaxed him those last 20 feet. He seemed to know he had to get out of sight. He used those massive arms to pull himself across the ground and into the dark shed. He collapsed onto the dirt floor, his legs stretched out, looking up at me with those same intelligent, weary eyes. I brought him a 5-gallon bucket of clean water from my well, and he drank the entire thing. Then I brought him the only food I had that seemed appropriate, a rack of deer ribs from my freezer. He took it from my hand, so gently. His fingers were thick as bananas, but his touch was delicate. He didn't tear at the meat, he just ate. I did my best to clean his wound again, wrapping it in clean rags. He winced, but he let me. Nobody can know you're here, I told him, standing at the door. Nobody. You can't make a sound. You understand me? No sounds. He just looked at me. Then, impossibly, he gave a short, slow nod. A clear, deliberate nod. My blood ran cold. "Good God," I whispered. "You really do understand." I backed out and slid the heavy wooden bar across the door. Not to lock him in, but to keep everything else out. I spent that night in my cabin, sitting in the dark, shotgun across my lap, listening. I didn't sleep. The adrenaline was too high. The psychological weight of what I'd done was crushing. I had a 9-foot, injured monster sitting in my shed. I had crossed a line there was no coming back from. I spent the next few days in a state of high alert. I'd boat into town for supplies, bandages, antiseptic, and more food than I'd ever bought in my life. I told the clerk at the general store I was baiting for gators. I don't know if he believed me. I'd spend my days watching the waterways, my shotgun always ready, and my nights tending to him. I'd bring him food, change his bandages, and just sit with him. We started to communicate, not with words, but with gestures. He'd point at his empty water bucket. He'd nod for yes and shake his head for no. I learned his sounds. A low grunt meant pain. A soft huff meant thank you. By the end of the first week, the infection was going down. The wound was starting to close. He could put a little weight on the leg, and I'd started calling him Moses because I'd found him in the water, pulled from the reeds. He seemed to like the name. He'd look at me when I said it. By the end of the second week, I knew he was going to make it. The relief was incredible, but it was replaced by a new, colder fear. He was getting better. He was getting stronger. And soon I'd have to make another choice. Let him go. Or what? I didn't have to wait long for the answer, because on the 15th day, just 4 days after I'd found him, I got a visit. It wasn't hunters. It wasn't the sheriff. It was a camouflage green airboat, the kind the government uses, fish and wildlife. They were asking about unusual animal activity. Someone had reported a scream that echoed across the basin. The same day I'd set Moses free from the trap. I lied. I told them it was probably a panther. I offered them coffee and tried to act normal, all while my heart hammered against my ribs. Moses was in the shed, not 50 yards away, and I prayed he'd have the sense to stay silent. They left eventually, but I knew they weren't satisfied. I went to the shed that night, my hands shaking. "They're looking," I told Moses, who was now standing, favoring his good leg. "They're looking for you." He just looked at me. He understood. And that's when I knew. I couldn't let him go. Not yet. Maybe not ever. If I let him go, they'd find him. They'd hunt him. He wasn't my prisoner, he was my secret, and I would be his guardian. That was September 1991. The world had no idea that in a sinking shed in the middle of the Atchafalaya, a broken man and a living legend had just formed an alliance that would last for 33 years. Getting him back to my cabin was the hardest physical work I've ever done. It took hours. It's only about a quarter mile through the swamp, but it felt like 100. He couldn't walk, not really. He could only hop and drag that mangled leg. I used my boat to support most of his weight. I'd get him leaning on the gunwale and I'd pull the boat forward foot by agonizing foot while he sort of limped and crawled alongside through the shallow water and mud. The whole time, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. Every snap of a twig, every bird call sounded like an approaching hunter. I was paranoid, terrified. What in God's name was I doing? I wasn't just helping an animal. I was hiding evidence. I was harboring the biggest secret on the planet. By the time we reached the muddy bank behind my cabin, it was late afternoon and we were both exhausted. He collapsed onto the mud, breathing in huge, ragged gasps. I was covered in his blood and my own sweat. My smokehouse was just an old, windowless cypress wood shed, built strong to keep bears out. It was perfect. It was dark, secure, and far enough from the cabin that I wouldn't hear him, and he wouldn't hear me. "Okay, big guy," I panted. "Just a little further. We gotta get you inside before dark." I half dragged, half coaxed him those last 20 feet. He seemed to know he had to get out of sight. He used those massive arms to pull himself across the ground and into the dark shed. He collapsed onto the dirt floor, his legs stretched out, looking up at me with those same intelligent, weary eyes. I brought him a 5-gallon bucket of clean water from my well, and he drank the entire thing. Then I brought him the only food I had that seemed appropriate, a rack of deer ribs from my freezer. He took it from my hand, so gently. His fingers were thick as bananas, but his touch was delicate. He didn't tear at the meat. He just ate. I did my best to clean his wound again, wrapping it in clean rags. He winced, but he let me. "Nobody can know you're here," I told him, standing at the door. Nobody. You can't make a sound. You understand me? No sounds. He just looked at me. Then impossibly he gave a short, slow nod. A clear, deliberate nod. My blood ran cold. Good God, I whispered. You really do understand. I backed out and slid the heavy wooden bar across the door. Not to lock him in, but to keep everything else out. I spent that night in my cabin, sitting in the dark, shotgun across my lap, listening. I didn't sleep. The adrenaline was too high. The psychological weight of what I'd done was crushing. I had a 9-foot, injured monster sitting in my shed. I had crossed a line there was no coming back from. I spent the next few days in a state of high alert. I'd bowed into town for supplies, bandages, antiseptic, and more food than I'd ever bought in my life. I told the clerk at the general store I was baiting for gators. I don't know if he believed me. I'd spend my days watching the waterways, my shotgun always ready, and my nights tending to him. I'd bring him food, change his bandages, and just sit with him. We started to communicate. Not with words, but with gestures. He'd point at his empty water bucket. He'd nod for yes and shake his head for no. I learned his sounds. A low grunt meant pain. A soft huff meant thank you. By the end of the first week, the infection was going down. The wound was starting to close. He could put a little weight on the leg, and I'd started calling him Moses, because I'd found him in the water, pulled from the reeds. He seemed to like the name. He'd look at me when I said it. By the end of the second week, I knew he was going to make it. The relief was incredible, but it was replaced by a new, colder fear. He was getting better. He was getting stronger. And soon, I'd have to make another choice. Let him go, or what? I didn't have to wait long for the answer, because on the 15th day, just 4 days after I'd found him, I got a visit. It wasn't hunters. It wasn't the sheriff. It was a camouflage green airboat, the kind the government uses. Fish and wildlife. They were asking about unusual animal activity. Someone had reported a scream that echoed across the basin. The same day I'd set Moses free from the trap. I lied. I told them it was probably a panther. I offered them coffee and tried to act normal, all while my heart hammered against my ribs. Moses was in the shed, not 50 yards away, and I prayed he'd have the sense to stay silent. They left eventually, but I knew they weren't satisfied. I went to the shed that night, my hands shaking. They're looking, I told Moses, who was now standing, favoring his good leg. They're looking for you. He just looked at me. He understood, and that's when I knew. I couldn't let him go. Not yet. Maybe not ever. If I let him go, they'd find him, they'd hunt him. He wasn't my prisoner. He was my secret, and I would be his guardian. That was September 1991. The world had no idea that in a sinking shed in the middle of the Atchafalaya, a broken man and a living legend had just formed an alliance that would last for 33 years. For the next few years, we fell into a routine. It was a life of absolute secrecy. Moses healed. That leg would always be stiff. He'd walk with a slight limp for the rest of his life, but he was strong again. Incredibly strong. I knew he could leave. The smokehouse door was never locked. The bar was just to keep intruders out. But he stayed. Maybe he knew he was safe. Maybe he'd been an outcast, alone, even before I found him. Or maybe he just understood what I was offering. Protection from a world that would hunt him down. Whatever the reason, Moses stayed. And my life became dedicated to keeping his secret. Living with Moses meant completely restructuring my existence. The smokehouse was his home, his sanctuary. But the real challenge was the outside world. The swamp was my territory, but it wasn't just mine. The immediate danger wasn't the government. Not yet. It was the locals. Cajun hunters and gator trappers. These guys have lived in the Atchafalaya for generations. They don't miss anything. They know every waterway, every heron's nest, every submerged stump. And I was now a massive anomaly. The biggest challenge was food. Moses was enormous. I figured he was around 800 pounds and he needed to eat constantly. His diet was omnivorous. He'd eat fish, deer, roots, berries. I couldn't just hunt for two full-grown, beings without raising suspicion. I had to get creative. I started running fishing lines in remote areas, telling people I was selling catfish to markets in New Iberia. I'd hunt deer, but I'd sink the hides and bones in a deep part of the swamp, telling everyone the season was bad, that I wasn't having any luck. I was driving to 3 different towns for groceries, buying rice and canned goods in bulk, so no single clerk would notice how much one man was buying. Every day was a balancing act of logistics and paranoia. Moses adapted. He was naturally nocturnal. He'd sleep most of the day in the dark, cool smokehouse, and become active at night. I'd spend my evenings with him. We developed our own rhythm. He was fascinated by human things. I had an old battery-powered radio, and he loved it. He'd sit for hours, his head tilted, listening to the static-filled Cajun music from the local station. It seemed to calm him. But the close calls almost broke me. In the summer of 1993, a bad drought lowered the water levels. A couple of gator hunters, the Trosclair brothers, decided to try a new route that took them within 100 yards of my cabin. I heard their boat engine long before I saw it. Moses heard it too. I ran to the smokehouse. "You have to be silent," I whispered, barring the door. "Do not make a sound." I grabbed my shotgun and sat on my porch trying to look casual, my heart hammering. They spotted me and cut their engine, drifting over. "Bane," one of them nodded. "Ain't seen you in town. Heard you was running a hell of a lot of traps." "Just getting by like everyone," I said, my hand tightening on the shotgun. "Funny thing," the other one said, spitting tobacco into the water. "We've been finding tracks back here. Big ones. Bigger than any black bear. You seen anything unusual, Arthur?" I could feel the sweat dripping down my back. Inside the smokehouse, everything was dead silent. "Nothing but gators and hogs," I lied. "Water's low. Probably just a big old boar wandering where he shouldn't." They stared at me for a long, agonizing minute. I stared back. It was a silent challenge. Finally, the first brother nodded. "You keep an eye out. Something big is back here, and we aim to find it." They started their engine and left. I sat on that porch for an hour, shaking before I could even stand up. When I finally went to check on Moses, he was standing by the back wall, perfectly still. He had dug his fingers into the cypress wood, bracing himself, silent as a statue. His self-control was terrifying. That night, I knew the smokehouse wasn't enough. I had to do something more. It took me 6 months, working only in the dead of night, using only hand tools. I dug a tunnel, a short one maybe 20 feet long, from the back of the smokehouse to a deep, dense thicket of cypress and blackberry bushes. I reinforced it with timber and mud. The first night I opened it, Moses was hesitant. He sniffed the air. Then he crawled through. I'll never forget the sight of it. He stood up in that thicket, hidden from the world by a wall of thorns and leaves, and he just looked up. He looked up at the moon. He hadn't been under an open sky in almost 2 years. He made a soft sound, a low rumble of what I can only describe as relief. I knew it wasn't freedom. It was just a bigger cage, but it was the best I could do. He was my responsibility, and the world was full of men like the Trosclair brothers, men who would see him not as a person, but as a trophy. I would never let that happen. The years just evaporated. The 90s bled into the 2000s. Bill Clinton was president, then George W. Bush. The world was worrying about Y2K, then 9/11. None of it mattered to me. My world was the swamp, my cabin, and the secret in my back tunnel. By 2005, Moses had been with me for 14 years. He was my only companion. My family had long since stopped trying to contact me. The people in town, the few I saw when I had to get fuel, they knew me as the swamp hermit, a crazy old coot. I was fine with that. It was safer. The crazier they thought I was, the more they'd leave me alone. My life was a routine of sacrifice. I was in my 50s now, and my body ached. But every night, rain or shine, I'd take a portion of my hunt or my catch out to the thicket. I'd whistle, a low 2-tone call, and he'd answer with that deep wooden thud-thud-thud. We'd sit, him hidden in the brush, me on an old stump, and I'd just talk. I told him about my ex-wife, about the job I'd lost. He'd just listen, his big, intelligent eyes watching me from the shadows. I don't know what he understood, but he was there. Then, in August 2005, the world ended. Katrina. I'd ridden out hurricanes before, but this was different. This was a monster. The wind didn't howl, it screamed. And the water, the surge came in like a tidal wave. My cabin was flooded with 2 feet of black, filthy water. The smokehouse and the tunnel were completely submerged. Moses had nowhere to go. The storm passed, but the water stayed, higher than the flood of '91. The entire swamp was a ruined, toxic sea. I was trapped on my roof. On the second day, I saw him. Moses was clinging to a stand of cypress trees 100 yards away, just like the day I'd met him. But this time the world was watching. Helicopters were in the air. News crews. National Guard. They were flying rescue missions, searching for survivors. "You can't stay there," I yelled at him over the wind. "They'll see you." I waded through the chest-deep water, got my boat, and paddled over. "You're coming with me," I said. "It's the only way." It was a nightmare getting him into my cabin. He was terrified of the enclosed space, but the sound of the helicopters was worse. I got him inside into the dark back room and covered him with tarps. He was shaking. I was shaking. "You have to be silent, Moses. Life or death silent." He made a low, trembling sound. He knew. 2 hours later, I heard it. A high-speed airboat. It was the National Guard. 2 young soldiers in camouflage. They pulled up to my flooded porch. "Sir, this is a mandatory evacuation zone. You have to come with us," one of them shouted. I stood in the doorway, my shotgun in my hand, held loosely at my side. "I'm not leaving," I said. "Sir, the water is toxic, and there's no power or food coming. You will evacuate." "This is my property," I said, my voice low. "I've got food. I'm staying." The soldier looked at me. Then his eyes drifted past me into the dark house. Moses was in the back room, not 20 feet away. He was holding his breath. I could feel him holding his breath. "What do you have in the house, sir?" the soldier asked, his hand moving to his sidearm. My blood turned to ice. This was it. The moment I had dreaded for 14 years. I raised the shotgun, not pointing at him, but holding it across my chest. A clear no-go sign. "Just me," I said. "And I'm not leaving. You best go find someone who wants to be saved." We stared at each other for a solid 10 seconds. The soldier saw the look in my eyes. The crazy hermit look. The look of a man with nothing to lose. Finally, he cursed under his breath. "Fine. Die out here then." He made a note on his clipboard. I saw what he wrote. Hostile. Refused evac. He got back in the boat, and they sped off, leaving a wake that rocked my porch. I sagged against the doorframe, my legs giving out. I'd done it. I'd pointed a gun at a United States soldier. I had officially, completely, fallen out of the civilized world. I went back to the room. Moses was huddled in the corner, his head down. He looked up when I came in. "It's okay, buddy," I panted, sliding down the wall to sit on the wet floor. "It's okay. They're gone." He slowly reached out one of his massive, muddy hands and just placed it on my shoulder. It was the first time he'd ever initiated contact like that. A gesture of comfort. We stayed in that flooded, ruined house for 2 weeks, just the two of us, waiting for the world to go away. We had crossed a new line. I wasn't just his guardian anymore. I was his accomplice. And now I was on a government list. After Katrina, things changed. The world was broken, and it seemed like everyone had bigger problems than chasing shadows in the swamp. The Trosclair brothers lost their boats. The fish and wildlife patrols were busy with recovery, not rumors. For a while, the pressure was off, but I was changed. Pointing that gun at the National Guard, it showed me how far I was willing to go. There was no line I wouldn't cross for Moses. The 2000s turned into the 2010s. I was in my 60s. Moses, God, he must have been in his 40s, maybe 50s. His hair was getting flecks of gray around his muzzle and chest. He was a middle-aged Bigfoot. Our communication became a language. It was more than nods and grunts. I'd whistle. He'd tap. He learned to recognize the sound of my boat engine, and he'd be waiting by the thicket entrance. The miracle wasn't just that he existed. The miracle was that we coexisted. We were 2 old hermits, living parallel lives, bound by a 20-year-old secret. I brought him a gift one day. A stupid thing. I'd found an old shatterproof mirror at the dump. I don't know what I thought. I was curious if he knew what he was. I left it on the stump and backed away. He picked it up. He's incredibly strong. I'd seen him move fallen cypress logs that weighed 1,000 pounds, but he held this mirror with the delicacy of a child. He looked into it. He turned it over. He looked at me, then back at the mirror. He opened his mouth, showing his massive teeth, and watched his reflection do the same. Then he made a sound. A soft, huffing sound. I'd heard it before. It was the sound I'd come to recognize as a laugh. "Yeah, you're one ugly son of a bitch," I said, laughing with him. "But I guess I'm not much to look at either." He placed the mirror on the ground gently, then pointed at it, and then pointed at me. "You, Me. Same. I stopped laughing. Yeah, buddy, I said, my voice thick. Yeah, we are. That was our life. It was quiet. It was peaceful. And I got careless. The world had changed in ways I didn't understand. Technology. I didn't have a cell phone. I didn't have a computer. But other people did. In 2018, a university group came out doing a survey on invasive plant species. They weren't hunters. They weren't the government. They were just kids, scientists. And they brought a drone. I heard it before I saw it. A high-pitched electric whining. I looked up and saw the little quadcopter hovering over the tree line, maybe 200 yards away. A cold, electric panic shot through me. Moses was in the thicket, hidden from the ground, but not from the sky. I ran to the thicket. Inside, I yelled, not whispering. Get in the tunnel now. Moses heard the urgency in my voice. He scrambled into the tunnel, pulling the mud and root-covered door closed just as the drone buzzed almost directly overhead. I grabbed my shotgun. My first instinct was to shoot it down, but I knew that would bring them right to me. Instead, I ran to my boat, cranked the engine, and sped out onto the main channel, waving my arms like a crazy person. I found their boat half a mile away. Get that damn thing out of here, I screamed at them, a crazy bearded old hermit fulfilling their every expectation. You're spooking the gators, harassing wildlife. The young man flying it looked annoyed, but he brought the drone back. Sir, we have a permit to be here. I don't give a damn about your permit, I roared. This is my swamp. You fly that thing over my property again, I'll shoot it down. You understand me? They packed up. They called me every name in the book. But they left. I went back to the stump, my heart rattling. It was too close. The world was getting smaller. The walls were closing in. I couldn't protect him from the sky. That night I sat with Moses, and I felt a new kind of despair. The Quay's disaster, the near miss. It felt different. It wasn't just a close call. It felt like the beginning of the end. I don't know how to keep you safe anymore, buddy, I told him. The world's got too many eyes. He just sat there in the dark, watching me, that mirror glinting in the moonlight beside him. He understood. The peace we'd built for 27 years. It was about to break. The drone incident in 2018 was the beginning of the end. It changed me. The paranoia I'd lived with for 27 years solidified into a cold, hard dread. I became more reclusive, more hostile. I stopped going to town for anything but fuel. I set up my own perimeter, crude traps and tripwires designed to make noise to warn me if anyone was coming. I got old. I turned 68. The work got harder. Hauling deer carcasses, poling the boat. It all took its toll. And in 2024, 33 years after I first found him, I got sloppy. It was a simple mistake. A mistake born of exhaustion. There's a hunter I know, a younger guy who runs cams a few miles east of my property. I've always known his routes, and I've always been careful to move Moses's food around his territory. But this time I took a shortcut. I was tired. My back was aching. I figured it was safe enough. It wasn't. It happened last Tuesday. It was just after dawn. I heard the sound I'd been dreading for half my life. Not a swamp boat. Not a hunter. The deep, percussive thwack, thwack, thwack of a helicopter. It wasn't a National Guard Huey. It was black, fast, and military. It didn't circle. It came straight for my cabin. I ran to the smokehouse. Moses, tunnel, now! I screamed, my voice cracking. Go, don't come out, no matter what. He heard the panic. He was gone in a second. I ran back to the cabin, grabbed my shotgun, and stood on the porch, my heart trying to beat its way out of my chest. The helicopter landed on the only patch of dry ground I owned, 50 yards from my cabin. The prop wash flattened the tall grass and tore leaves from the trees. 2 men in black tactical gear jumped out, weapons held low. They weren't soldiers. They were feds. Another man followed them. He wasn't in tactical gear. He wore black boots, black cargo pants, and a black polo shirt with an embroidered logo I couldn't read. He was in his 50s, looked like he'd been carved from iron, and his eyes were cold. He walked right up to my porch, stopping just out of shotgun range. Arthur Bain? He called out. He didn't shout. His voice cut right through the helicopter's idling engine. I just nodded, my hands white-knuckling the shotgun. I'm Agent Keene, he said. We know you're armed, Mr. Bain. We are too. But we're not here to hurt you. We're here to talk about what you're hiding in that shed. My blood turned to ice water. It was over. 33 years, gone. I'm a private citizen on my own property, I said, my voice shaking. You've got no right. We've got every right, Keen interrupted. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, laminated photograph. He tossed it onto the porch. I looked down. It was a trail cam picture. Grainy, black and white, time-stamped 6 weeks ago. It was Moses, clear as day, dragging a deer carcass. My shortcut. You got sloppy, Keen said. A hunter posted this to a private cryptid forum. It lit up every red flag we have. We've been watching you ever since. I stared at the photo. I'd failed him. After 33 years, I'd failed him. So what now? I whispered. You gonna put him in a cage? Put me in one? Keen stared at me for a long moment. That's what this is about, isn't it? 33 years. You've been protecting him. Get off my land, I said, raising the shotgun just an inch. Keen didn't flinch. We're not here to take him, Mr. Bain. I paused. What? We're here to talk about his diet. We believe you're not giving him the right micronutrients. I was so stunned, I literally lowered the shotgun. What? What did you just say? Keen nodded to one of his men who brought over a heavy-duty aluminum case. He opened it. It was filled with medical vials, tagging equipment, and sealed food packets. This is the climax of your story, Mr. Bain. This is the part where you find out you've been doing our job for us. Unpaid. I couldn't process the words. You knew? We've known about you since 2005. The National Guard report from Katrina. Hostile. Refused evac. You got flagged. He pointed at the sky. The drone in 2018, the university kids, that was us. We saw the tunnel entrance, we saw the tracks. We just couldn't believe it. You let me. You were doing a better job than we could, Keen said. You'd established contact. A peaceful, long-term relationship. That's the holy grail, Mr. Bain. We didn't want to spook you. We've been protecting your secret. But this trail cam picture, it blew our containment. Now that the public has a copy, we have to accelerate the timeline. He stepped onto the porch, stopping a few feet from me. So, here's what's going to happen. You're going to keep doing exactly what you've been doing. But from now on, you're going to be on our payroll. Ok. Aqui está o capítulo 7, a conclusão da história. Etapa 2. Capítulo 7. A transformação. I just stood there, on my porch, holding a useless shotgun. The world had turned upside down. For 33 years, I'd been living in terror of these men. For 33 years, I'd seen myself as a lone guardian, a hermit fighting the world. And in 33 seconds, they'd told me I wasn't the guardian. I was just the zookeeper. You're hiring me? I finally managed to say. We're officially engaging you as a field consultant, Keen said, deadpan. You'll receive a monthly stipend. You'll be provided with high-protein supplements, medical supplies, and advanced monitoring equipment. You'll report to me. Your life doesn't change. It just gets classified. He pointed to the heavy case. We need a blood sample, a hair sample, and we need to tag him. A subcutaneous GPS tracker. We'll do it. You just need to get him to cooperate. I looked from Keen to the dark, silent tunnel. Moses was in there, hiding, terrified for me. And all this time the real threat wasn't the men with guns, it was a kid with a trail cam. He won't let you, I said. He's terrified of strangers. He's not terrified of you, Arthur, Keen said. You've spent 3 decades building trust. That's something we can't replicate. We're not here to take over. We're here to help you. The Trosclair brothers, the ones who almost found you in '93, we convinced them to move their trapping lines. The oil surveyors, we lost their permits. We've been your guardian angels, Arthur. We just need you to make this official. The shock was fading, replaced by a strange, hollow feeling. My grand sacrifice, my lonely, paranoid life, it had been managed. What if I say no? I asked. Keen looked at me, and for the first time, his eyes softened. Just a fraction. If you say no, we leave. We can't force you. But that picture is out there. The forums are going crazy. Hunters, monster trackers, TV crews. They're going to come. They're all going to come. We're the only ones who can stop them. We can classify this entire basin as a federal research zone. We can keep them all out, but only if you're on the payroll. He wasn't threatening me. He was telling me the truth. My secret was over. The only choice left was how it ended. I put the shotgun down. Okay, I said, my voice hoarse. Okay, but you do it my way. No guns, no uniforms. And he sees me first. That's all we ever wanted, Arthur, Keene said. The balance had changed. The weight of the secret, the one I'd carried alone for 33 years, was suddenly lifted, but it was replaced by something else, the realization that I was no longer in control. I was just a piece in a much, much larger puzzle. That was 6 months ago. My life is different. I still live in the cabin. I still go out every night to the thicket. I still whistle my two-tone call, and Moses still answers with his thud, thud, thud. But now, the food I bring him is a high-density protein bar developed in some lab in Virginia. He's got a small, subcutaneous tracker under his left shoulder blade. I've collected the hair samples. I've taken the blood. Agent Keene visits once a month. He lands his black helicopter on the dry patch, and we sit on the porch and drink coffee, like two old colleagues. He brings me satellite photos, shows me heat signatures. Moses isn't the only one. There's a small population, maybe 5 or 6, living in the deepest part of the basin. The FBI has known about them since the 70s. They call them remnants, survivors of an ancient species, hiding in the last places the modern world hasn't paved over. My job, my real job, is to be the ambassador, to keep the peace. Last night I was sitting on the stump. Moses was watching me from the shadows. I looked at the new high-tech camera I'd placed by the tunnel. It was watching us both. For 33 years I thought I was protecting a monster from the world, but it turns out the world was protecting him with me. The FBI. They did the last thing I ever expected. They gave me a pension. My name is Arthur Bain, and I'm 68 years old. My secret is out, but it's safer now than it's ever been. Because in the swamp, you learn that the biggest predator isn't always the one with teeth. Sometimes it's the one with a clipboard. And sometimes the most dangerous thing in the world isn't the creature hiding in the fog. It's the man who finally decides to trust it.